Okay, so we're going to do the melt moves from this class this morning. This will be from class 2. We'll start with a foot treatment with a balance assessment. We'll move on to do an assessment on the floor and the rebalance technique with the double arm reach included in that. We're going to do inner thigh and back of thigh. So let's get started. So my feet are about hip distance apart and the tops of my toes are even on my right and my left foot. My hands are just by my sides. If you want to close your eyes, you can, but you certainly don't have to, especially if you don't have very good balance. We already know that from our class this morning. You can keep your eyes open if you want, or you can close them. And I'm just going to ask you to come right down into your feet and just feel the way your feet are pressing into the floor. And you're going to ask yourself a few questions for your assessment, and they can include the following. Do you feel like one foot is heavier into the floor than the other one, or do they feel pretty evenly weighted? And for most of us, we'll have one foot that feels like it's got a little bit more weight on it than the other one. And then I asked you if you felt like more of your body weight is on your toes, on the balls of your feet, or are you leaning back into your heels? Perhaps you notice that you have more body weight on the outside of the foot or the inside of the foot. And then the right foot can be feeling very different than the left. And then I'll also add that I've had students that have perfectly aligned feet, but they have a whole lot of dysfunction in their body. So it's not a clear indicator of how healthy your alignment is. From here, I'm going to track up my shins and think about my knees. Ideally, I don't want them to be locked back. If they are pulled back into the joint, I will notice that my quadriceps, my thighs, and my gluteus muscles are kind of tight and grippy. I just want to let all that go. So just assess how you feel. We also did a little balance assessment today. So I'm going to ask you to do that with me now. You can choose to use your melt method roller, and you can have that next to you just for a little balance and stability, but you can see that it's kind of like a noodle, right? So you don't want to have to put too much weight on that. If you want to, you could be at your kitchen counter, or you could pull a chair close to you, have something that you can touch if you need it. So again, both feet are hip distance apart. My toes are even. I'm going to look right across the patio, and I'm going to take my right heel and lift that off the floor. I'm going to exhale to engage my core. And I'm going to float that right foot up. So I had you hold that there for about, maybe 10 or 20 seconds or so. But science says we should be able to hold our balance for 30 seconds with our eyes open. Science says. And then I'm just going to go ahead and keep you right here and ask you to close your eyes. And you can see I get a little bit tippier. And that'll be my assessment here on my left foot. And let's try it on my right. So I'm going to move my roller off to my right side. I'm going to go ahead and pick my left heel up. I'm going to have a nice neutral alignment, as good as I can get it without having been on the roller yet. Exhale to engage your core. I'm going to float the ball of the foot up. So my eyes are open. And then I'm going to close my eyes right now. So you might see I just get a little wobbly through my ankle. And then I'm going to go ahead and open my eyes and bring that foot back down. So again, science says we should be able to stand on one foot for at least 30 seconds. And then I think with your eyes closed, it's 15 seconds. So I'm going to use that as part of my assessment today. And I'm going to move on to do the mini softball treatment for my feet. So I have the ball in position number 1, right in the smack dab center of my foot. I'm going to tip my body weight from side to side. We do this because we're finding tolerable pressure on the bottom of the foot. You don't want this to be painful. If it is painful, go ahead and do a position point press at position 5, and then come on back here into the center of your foot. I'm going to come onto both feet, and I always think about my toes being down on the floor. I don't want to be leaning on the outside or inside of my foot. I want to be nice and neutral. Bend your knees, rotate your spine, and swing your arms around. So this helps us moving the joints of around the body over the center of gravity, helps us find that communication between the joints of the body and the center of gravity in your pelvis. Come on back up. In other words, it helps you with that leg length question. Okay, let me just pull this up so you can see that. And I'm going to take the ball back to position number 5, because this is just the mini softball treatment. I'm going to take a focused press into position number 5. I'm going to hold that for a breath, and then I'll come back onto my left foot, and I'm going to have a light touch here on the right as I go into my glide. So gliding is a 2-directional move, feeling my way through the tissue, taking the ball up onto my heel. If I had a bone spur or plantar fasciitis, I would really feel that even with this nice soft ball. And I'm going to bring the ball back into position number 5. I'm going to settle my weight right here at position 5, and I'm going to push down on my foot, and I'm going to scratch the ball into position number 5. This is a shear technique. So shearing is breaking up the dry viscous fluid that accumulates inside of this little system, this little filament system inside the body that's everywhere. I'm going to hold that still and take a focused breath and take my foot off the ball. In Sue's directions that I sent you last week, she does not include the ball of the foot rinse, but I love that so much. I always want to do it. So I have the ball right here underneath the big toe mound. You can see that it's not poking out into the side of my foot. It's right underneath my foot. I'm going to pivot on my heel. I lighten the touch on the ball to return it back. So there's pressure on the ball to pivot on my heel, and I lightly bring it back. So this is pushing fluid from the big toe over to the pinky toe. Do that about 3 or 4 times. And then I'm going to move on to a rinse for the bottom of my foot, starting right here at position 2, inside the ball of my foot. I'm going to put some pressure on the ball as I bring my foot forward, and you can see I step forward, and that keeps the weight of my body on the ball during the whole pass. And now I'm just decompressing each knuckle as that ball pushes into the knuckle from below and follows the length of the long bone in your foot, and then it ends up being pinched between your foot and the mat. Once you do each toe knuckle and long bone, you just do it a few more times anywhere you like. Okay, so from here, once I've done that, I'm going to go ahead and do friction. So friction is lightly moving your foot on top of the ball. You're shaking your thigh, and that helps the fluid come up into this fascial system, these lines of connective tissue. And then I'm going to go ahead and settle my right foot on the floor. And you can just acknowledge that the right foot feels a little different than the left. It might feel a little heavier, might feel a little bit warmer, but whatever it is, you want it to be moving you in the right direction. So no pain, right? I have the ball underneath the center of my left foot, and I'm going to go ahead and do the same technique. I'm just tipping from side to side, finding tolerable pressure, kind of moving into that fascia of the bottom of the foot, which can be a little dry and a little rigid. You want it to be tough, but you want it to be supple at the same time. Both feet are going to settle down into the floor. I'm going to bend my knees, rotate my spine, and swing my arms. Again, this is helping me move the joints around the center of gravity to help me communicate better in my body so that I can have better balance. I won't feel like one leg is longer than the other one. Come on back up. And so if you do feel like one leg is longer than the other one, you're going to move that way. So I don't want that. I want to be symmetrical in my body. So here I am at position number 5. I'm going to take a focused breath. And on my exhale, I'm going to put weight on my foot. I'm pressing into 5. And I'm going to come back onto my right foot where I'm going to go into my glide. My foot goes forward, so the ball comes onto my heel, gliding. And then come back to position number 5. Settle a little bit of body weight on your foot and give it a good scratch. This is your shear. And just hang out here and wait. I have pressure, I have weight on that left foot. It's squeezing on the connective tissue. And as soon as I release, fluid is going to pool back into that area, which is exactly what we want. I'm going to take the ball underneath my big toe mound, where I'm going to pivot on my heel to rinse across the ball of my foot. I'm moving fluid from the big toe mound over to the pinky toe. From here, I'm going to rinse down the bottom of my foot. I have the ball right there underneath the big toe mound. I'm going to keep pressure on my foot as I bring my left foot forward. I think about keeping my rib cage over my foot. I'm pressing into the second toe knuckle. If I look down, I'm not seeing the ball sneak between my toes. It's really in the ball of my foot. Also, just to remind you, try to look across the room. When you do this, it's certainly great to look down at your foot and just make sure you have the ball exactly where you want it. And then look across the room as you roll the ball to your heel. Just that technique alone is going to help the little proprioceptors, these little specialized cells in your body that help you figure out where you are in time and space. It'll work a little bit harder for you to help you maintain your balance. So once I've done each toe knuckle and long bone, do it a few more times on your foot. So it's a total of about 8 of those passes. Then I'm going to do friction. I'm just balancing on my right foot and letting the ball travel on the bottom of my left, letting my thighs shake, pulling the fluid from my foot up into all of the lines of my body. We want a fluid exchange here. And I've taken the ball underneath my right foot, and I'm just going to do friction one more time. Okay, so from here, I'm going to settle my feet onto the mat. And again, if the mat feels kind of sticky to you, you don't have to be standing on your mat. You might want to stand on the carpet or the floor. If your feet are delicate, then you could always stand on a carpet. That might feel a little bit more comfortable for you. If your floor is cold, you might prefer the carpet. Anywhere that you can feel the shape of your foot on the floor is fine. Okay, so let's just do a quick reassessment. So my feet are about hip distance apart. My toes are even at the top. And I'm just noticing that my body weight feels very even right to left, feels very heavy into the floor. My whole foot, from the ball of the foot back to the heel, from the outside to the inside, it feels very neutral to me. Okay, scan up the shin, think about the knees. You know, I've told you before, my knees are always pulled back into the joint. So this feels nice and relaxed, nice and neutral. I was watching a woman walk today and she was wearing a brace on her right leg, and I could see that she was hyperextending that right knee. And I thought, gosh, I hope the physical therapist has really pointed that out to her, that that knee shouldn't be coming backwards like a stork, right? It should be nice and neutral and not pushing to the back of the joint. Anyway, so that's that. And then let's go on and do an assessment of your balance again. So I'm going to take my roller off to the left side. And I'm going to settle my feet into the floor, just acknowledge that I've got this great connection now to the floor. I feel very grounded, very balanced. I'm going to lift my right heel. I'm going to exhale to engage my core. I'm as neutral as I can be. And I'm going to pick that foot up and then close my eyes. And then I'll open my eyes and come back down. So it's okay if you kind of wobble a little bit. If you find that you keep tapping the floor, that to me would be an indicator that you really need to work on your balance. But if you're just kind of wiggly a little bit, that's okay. And then I'm going to go ahead and do the same thing on the other side. So I have the roller off to the right side. I'm going to lift up my heel, and I don't want to lean into the roller. I want this right leg to be nice and stacked, ankle, knee, and hip. I'm going to exhale to engage my core. And then I'm going to take this foot off the floor, this left foot. And then I'm going to close my eyes. And then I'll bring it back down. So it felt pretty good to me. I'd love to know if you feel like you get an improvement just from doing a foot treatment. I would hope that you would. Okay, let's move on. Let's have you lie on your mat, and we're going to do a rest assess. The pool is right there. Okay, so palms are up towards the ceiling, just nice and relaxed onto the floor. Wherever you are is your assessment today. You don't want to have to change anything or press anything into the floor. It's just an honest assessment. If you have any pain when you're doing your rest assess is done, and you could just come into that bent knee position and just kind of hang out here, or you could roll over into a shoulder and sit up. But that assessment's done. You don't need to be torturing yourself. Okay, so from here, we acknowledge that the body is made up of masses and spaces, that the masses of the body are weighted to the floor, your head and your heels. And then you have areas of the body that are lifted away, just naturally lifted away. And those are going to be the back of your neck and the back of your knees. And as I've said before, I feel like when the tissue is dry, the spaces of the body either get really big or they flatten out. And so it comes away from neutral. And it's going to affect how your body moves And it's going to lead to compensation in the body, which does eventually lead to pain, joint compression, and mobility issues. Okay, so now that we got that straight, I'm going to move into the first of 4 common areas of imbalance, places that we all kind of share some common chaos, and ask you to think about the shoulder blades. So ideally, the shoulder blades feel wide and flat and heavy, and you barely notice them on the floor. Or you might be like me and just notice that you're kind of propped up on those bones, especially the bottom edge. I can kind of feel those bones into the floor. And if I notice that, then I know that I have dry connective tissue around my shoulder blades, and that's going to interfere with the stability and the mobility of my arms. And it could end up giving me some hand pain, elbow pain, shoulder pain, neck pain. I can even have headaches as a result of this improper location of the shoulder blades. From here, take a finger and poke it into your belly button, and you're drawing a line straight through your body. And before your line touches the mat underneath you, you'll hopefully bump into the bottom of your rib cage. And the bottom of the rib cage is ideally weighted as a mass. The thoracic spine is in flexion slightly into the floor. For me, I'm kind of feeling like I've got a little space right there where the bottom of the rib cage is supposed to be on the floor. It feels like it's arched away. So that's going to tell me that I have a little bit of extra wear and tear in my spinal column. I'm holding a position called hyperextension, and I'm pulling on the diaphragm, and that's going to interfere with my respiration and my digestion. And I can totally fix that, and it feels so much better after I do. From here, I'm going to travel down into the pelvis, and ideally, I'm resting on my butt cheeks, which to me doesn't feel too bad today. But you might notice that you're resting on the back of your pelvis a little higher than your butt cheeks, or maybe you're resting on your tailbone, so that's going to be a little bit lower than the butt cheeks. If you have that improper alignment of the pelvis, then you're going to end up with some pain in the low back, some hip pain, maybe some leg pain. And again, it's a place that we can really fix, so we might as well. From here, let's travel down into the backs of the thighs. So the hamstring muscles ideally are resting on the floor, and they're even right to left. But you might notice that they feel like they're pulling away. And if the pelvis isn't in the right place, then it's easy to imagine that it's going to take the legs out of alignment as well. So you could have 1, 2, 3, or all 4 of those common areas of imbalance. So remember, the connective tissue is holding the body's shape. So if we can come into the system and ease out any of this stuck stress, this dehydration within the system, and add fresh fluid, we can improve our alignment. And if we can improve our alignment, we can get rid of compensation and pain. The last thing that we do here is an assessment called the autopilot assessment, and it has to do with that center of gravity business. So the nervous system works with the center of gravity to give you a sense of balance. And so if you're finding that one leg feels longer or one side of your body feels heavier, then it's a little miscommunication between the center of gravity, which is right here in the middle of your body, kind of the center of movement in your body, and it's not communicating well to the nervous system. And the reason why is because it's not in its neutral alignment. Okay, so I'm noticing this right leg feels like it's a little longer, and I have a little hyperextension in my spine, but everything else actually feels pretty good. My shoulders are a little pokey into the floor, I suppose. So I've got a few things that I can work on today. So I'm going to roll over into my shoulder, and I'm going to come on up, and I'm going to get on my roller. Okay, so once I'm on my roller, I want to make sure that my head is completely on the roller. Don't let your head fall off. My knees and my feet and my hips are in a neutral alignment. Sometimes I feel like people are a little wide with their feet, and it's just their nervous system trying to keep them on the roller. But see if you can bring your feet right in line with those hip bones. That would be a good place for you to be. And I'm going to let the backs of my shoulders get nice and heavy, just open up right through the chest. I love the way that feels. And then I'm going to keep my spine on the roller as I gently rock my body right and left. So hopefully in this video, you can see that as I tip over to the right side, that my left forearm and left hand actually come off the floor. I'm stable in my shoulder, so it's not like I'm lifting my arm. And this is a nice way to do gentle rocking because you're not putting extra tension on the shoulder as you tip to the opposite side. So I'm just keeping that shoulder nice and still. We're gently rocking to give some more fluid in through the spinal column, let it move a little bit. If you have TMJ, I've heard that it's because the fluid isn't moving well through the spinal column. So you're clenching your jaw at night in an attempt to move fluid through the body. So doing just some gentle rocking even before you go to bed might be a nice way to help your jaw pain. Come on back to center when you're ready. We did that for about 30 to 60 seconds. I'm going to take my hands on my pelvis, the heel of the hands on the hip bone, the fingertips into the pubic bone, and I'm going to take myself into a tuck. I'm just going to drop my low back curve down onto the roller by moving through the pelvis. The heel of the hand is lower, the tips of the fingers are high. I'm not putting any extra pressure on my feet. I'm not squeezing through my legs. If you have that tendency to do that, try to release some of that energy through the lower body. And then I'm going to go into my tilt position. So I'm going to arch my back away from the roller. My hands are going to move a little bit. So now the heel of the hand comes up, the tips of the fingers drop down a little bit, and I've created that big space in my back. Those are my two extreme ranges of motion here. And I'm going to get myself back down into the tuck. Now I do that because I can feel that my thoracic spine is on the roller when I'm in a tuck, but also my low back's on the roller too, right? So I'm going to take my low back and lift that away because I'm trying to find that neutral. So my low back is away from the roller. My thoracic spine is on the roller. Like if I draw that line, I can feel that sense of touch right there in my rib cage. But I have to say, I still feel like I'm kind of on the back of my pelvis here. I'm still kind of stuck in that tuck position. So I take my hands to the floor, engage my core, and I just give myself a little tiny reset. And I'll get a little bit more weight down towards my tailbone, and I'll be off of that big bone at the back of my pelvis. I've created a much bigger arch in through my low back curve right there at the lumbar spine. And the heel of the hand, the tips of the fingers feel very level here. So I really feel like I'm in a better position. I'm going to hold that position as I go into my 3D breath breakdown. I'm just going to take 2 breaths in each hand position. Just feeling the ribs move up to the ceiling, down towards the roller. I'm feeling both hands move as I breathe. I'm going to drop my hands onto my ribs. The elbows come down to the floor. I'm going to take 2 breaths here. And I can feel my ribs moving on into my hands as I breathe. Some people won't notice that. It's a little dry and sticky through the ribs and the diaphragm. One hand to the throat by the collarbones, the other hand way down to the pubic bone. And again, I want to feel those hands moving away from the midline of my body, feeling the length of my rib cage. It's very subtle. From here, I'm going to bring my hands onto my belly and I'm going to engage the core of my body through the transverse abdominis, which is that awesome muscle that wraps around my body. I'm going to inhale to prepare for movement. I'm going to exhale to engage. I want to feel my waistline get a little bit smaller. I want to feel that muscle engage. Once I do, I'm going to turn off that noisy breath and see if I can still find that little contraction through the core. Some people, the timing is off on that core contraction. This is a vital contraction in order for you to move in the most efficient manner. If the core doesn't engage or engages after you've moved, then it's not going to help you stabilize the body. So we talked a little bit about the neuro strength techniques through the MELT method, and that really does focus a lot of work on getting that core to fire very rapidly and efficiently. So from here, what I had you do was bring your hands into a prayer position and bring your hands up towards the ceiling and then open your hands just above your shoulders. Now, sometimes what I notice is people will move their hands really over the shoulder joint and they end up lifting the shoulders. I don't know if you'll be able to see that very well, but the shoulders end up coming up kind of high. So in order for me to help you avoid that temptation of hiking up your shoulders, sometimes I'll just ask people to lower their arms just a little bit. So the arm is kind of at the same angle as the leg. And we did a little shoulder blade reach today by lifting up towards the ceiling on your inhale, and then exhale to drop the backs of the shoulders down against the roller. You'll feel the shoulder blades hug the roller. Inhale to lift up and exhale to lower. So the shoulder blades are moving into protraction and retraction. It's a great way to kind of get a sense of the timing of the shoulder blades. Ideally, they hit the roller at the same time. I hope that you'll notice that my elbows are not bent. A lot of times people don't know how to move through the shoulder blades without bending their elbows, but you don't need to. They're both can move. They don't have to move together. So just let the shoulder blades move. The shoulder blade, underneath the shoulder blade, there's a layer of fat that kind of dries out over time. So this gives you a chance to get a little bit of lubrication underneath the shoulder blade. So from here, I'm going to let the backs of my shoulders kind of get heavy, and I'm going to open my arms out to a V shape. From here, I'm going to let all 10 fingers drop back. So this is wrist extension. And I love this one because I can get a sense of the length of my arm lines here. I'm going to keep the back of my shoulder blades kind of heavy against the roller. I avoid to use, I want to use the word tethered, but I don't want you to feel like you're pushing down. It's just the natural weight of the shoulder blades against the roller. And then I'm going to feel like I can pull the heel of my hand up towards the ceiling. And I can really feel the length of my arms. From here, I'm going to exhale and engage my core. And I'm going to take my right hand, excuse me, and I'm going to let those fingers point towards the left. So I'm in wrist flexion over on the right side and extension over on the left. I'm going to inhale to stay, and I'm going to exhale to move. So I just swap the position of the hands. Sue calls this neural flossing. So we just have this length of connective tissue that we are adjusting as we move into wrist extension and flexion. It's tugging on that tissue that goes from one hand up the arms, across the chest, across your back, and pulls down the other arm to the fingers. So we're just kind of lengthening and adjusting that tissue. And then what we did was we brought our hands back down to the floor. We just did a little bit more gentle rocking. Again, the back of my shoulders are nice and heavy. And I'm going to come back into the center. I'm going to lengthen one leg, and I'm going to slither off my roller. I'm not going to disturb my body as I come back down. So what I'm noticing is I feel like my shoulders have really dropped back here. I'm really on the back of my hands. They feel really nice and heavy. And if I take a finger and poke it into my belly button, I'm closer to the floor. I wouldn't say I'm perfect, but I'm closer to the floor here in the bottom of my rib cage. I can feel the lift of my low back. My butt cheeks are down, and even the back of my thighs have gotten a little bit closer to the floor. And if I close my eyes and divide my body in half, right and left, I'd feel very even. I wasn't too bad before, but I did notice that right leg was a little longer. So just notice. And that's going to give my body much better messaging as I move. Now my pelvis is going to communicate better through the nervous system to all of the joints of my body. It's going to help me figure out where I am. Okay, so the next thing that we're going to do is I'm going to have you roll over on your side, and we're going to do inner thigh. So inner thigh is part of the rooted core of the body. It starts at the bottoms of your feet, comes all the way up the inside of the leg into where that transverse abdominis is, into the rib cage, and all the way up into your neck and head. So it connects you from foot to head. So what I've done is I've taken the arch of my foot on the roller, dropped down my shin, and I always teasingly say I'm kind of on that little white meat that's just above my knee on the inner thigh. I'm going to let my foot come down on the floor. I want this to stay nice and heavy. I'm just going to move back so you can see. And I'm going to pull my roller up, and I want the top edge of the roller to be kind of level with my eyes. And then I'm going to move the roller away so I have this little triangle, this little piece of pizza on the floor. All right, I hope you can still hear me okay. And I'm going to my hand is going to come down on the floor. I'm just going to allow my body weight to lean forward towards my roller. I'm going to use my hand to push myself back. And I want to move from shoulder to hip, not just my leg, but I want everything to fall forward. Now, as you're doing this, if you start to notice there's an owie and it's really intense, you don't have to keep going over it and over it and over it. Just come right up against that little barrier. See if you can find a place that's tolerable. That's our safe word in the melt method. I'm going to go smaller and smaller until I stop, and I'm going to hold this leg heavy on the roller. I'm going to lift my foot off the floor and I'm going to bend and straighten. And sometimes for people, this actually feels pretty intense. Once you start to move the leg, you'll really notice that tenderness. You don't have to come all the way out, just find a comfortable range of motion, relatively speaking. There's a lot of opportunity for dryness and congestion here in the inner thigh. I'm going to keep my knee bent. I'm going to bring my foot up towards the ceiling, and you can see the front of my thigh comes onto my roller. So we're getting a little bit on the front of the thigh here. That's great to help separate those muscles. When the tissue is dry, it moves all the muscles together, and we want to be able to move individual muscles. The last shear technique that we're going to do is this one where it's a little lift and lower. And I always make this little noise when I teach. I go, ee. And it helps people to understand. I think it helps people to understand the movement here. So even if you can't see me in a class, you'll hear me make that noise and you'll go, oh, I know what she's doing right now. Because this is kind of a weird one to explain to people. Okay, I'm gonna let my foot just be heavy. I'm just resting the leg on the roller for a second, again, to allow the tissue to adapt and change. From here, I wanna move the roller to the middle of my inner thigh. Keep your leg heavy on the roller and just think about moving the chest so it's facing your mat. And when you do that, you can see that the roller just moves right up into the middle of my inner thigh, which is exactly what I want. I like to keep myself lifted in the sternal position. Sometimes I'll see students that have kind of a big hyperextension in their back. I'm going to kind of exaggerate that. And so it creates too much tension in their low back. So my suggestion is to tuck the pelvis. So you're just going to take your pubic bone, pull that down. One thing I didn't mention in class today is avoid the temptation to collapse into your shoulder blades, but feel like you could push your forearms into your mat and you'll feel much more stable into the shoulders and you won't hurt your neck and shoulder blades. So from here, I'm going to do the same thing. I'm going to shift my body over towards the roller. I'm looking for trouble. I'm keeping that roller and my leg in contact with each other. I'm just feeling my way in through the tissue. And I start to notice there's a little spot right there. So I don't need to keep rolling over that baby. I'm just going to come up against the barrier. I'm just going to go smaller and smaller until I ultimately stop. And when I do my shear technique, I let my chest settle down onto the mat. I want my body to be relaxed. I'm going to levitate my foot off the floor and I'm going to bend and straighten my leg. I'm going to do about 3 of those. Keep your heel close to your hip and then go ahead and bring your foot up towards the ceiling. And now I'm getting a little bit onto the front of my thigh. Let your foot just be heavy on the floor. Just take a moment to relax. Come on up. Shift your body or grab the roller. So you can shift, or the way that I usually do it is I just lift this leg up and pull my roller up. And it's very high on the top of my leg, almost to my pubic bone. So from here, I'm keeping myself lifted in the sternal position. I'm stable through my shoulders. I have my forearms kind of pushing down into the floor and my shoulder blades are pulling away from my spine rather than, which kind of drives me crazy when people do that. So don't do it. It kind of hurts your shoulders or hurts your neck. And you have the strength right there by pushing into your forearms. Okay, smaller and smaller until I stop in that inner thigh. You might find your spot right away. So again, you don't need to torture yourself. Lift your foot off the floor, bend and straighten. So this is all compression intended to push the dry fluid and replace it with fresh fluid. So we're just manipulating that tissue to break up that dryness. Bringing my foot right up towards the ceiling, and then I'm going to hang out here and I'm going to wait. Oh, I forgot to come back down onto the mat when I did my shear technique. So my bad. But to me, it feels fine to be up. It is kind of nicer just to be down and relaxed. So please forgive me for that. So you can either be up here or down, but I like to encourage you to come down. Okay. Blooper. So from here, I'm going to keep myself oriented towards the computer and I'm just going to flip myself to the other side. Okay. Okie doke. So I'm going to take the arch of my foot on my roller, let my leg settle down so the shin is on the roller. My foot's going to come down onto the floor. I'm going to lift the roller up so that the flat edge of the roller is in line with my eyes. I'm going to create this triangular space in between my body and the roller. My hand's going to come right down onto the floor. And I'm going to let my leg be settled onto the roller as I roll from shoulder to hip. And I'm going to use my hand to push myself back. You might find that congestion in the inner thigh very quickly, so don't feel like you need to keep rolling over it. Just get in and get out. So I'm going to start to go smaller and smaller until I stop. Levitate your foot off the floor, bend and straighten. I'm just going to hang out here and just wait for a moment. Go ahead and give it a little scratch. And then just wait. I'm going to come up into that sternal position. I'm going to keep my leg right here on the roller because when I come on up, it just goes right into the middle of my inner thigh. And I'm going to shift my body towards my roller and come back. Again, if you find your spot quickly, like some of you were saying, yowza, right? You were awfully stoic in class today. It was hard for me to tell unless I asked you how you were feeling. But you don't have to keep rolling over it. Just come up to the barrier, right up to that edge where you're starting to feel that tension, smaller and smaller until you stop. You can hold yourself in this position. I really do like to come down and let my body be relaxed when I go into my shear technique. And I think this works better for me because the shear technique can actually be kind of uncomfortable when you do have dryness in that inner thigh. And so I'm just letting my body come down so that I can just be as comfortable as I can under the circumstances. I'm lifting my foot up towards the ceiling. So we have 3 shear techniques. I'm only going to do the 3 on the first spot, which was just above the knee, and I'll just do the 2 as we move in. I'm just going to hang out here and I'm going to wait. And then I'm going to come back up into that sternal position. I'm just going to grab my roller and pull it up a little higher. I'm going to move into the roller in a way. It's very high up in my inner thigh. If you find your spot sooner than later, then go ahead and move smaller and smaller until you stop. Remember, you're supporting your torso by pushing your forearms into the floor. No collapse through the shoulder blades. Push up. I'm going to hang out here and I'm going to wait. I'm going to remember that I like to come down here onto the floor. Levitate your foot, bend and straight, bend and straighten. I'm going to keep my knee bent and I'm going to pull it up towards the ceiling. And then I'll just relax for a moment. Okay, cool. So that is the inner thigh. Let's move on and do the back of thigh. And as I said on my video on our class this morning, I prefer to have my heels on the floor rather than on my mat because my heels get kind of stuck on the mat. But I hardly ever remember to say that in class. I don't know what my problem is there. Okay, so we're going to do back of thigh. I have the roller quite high against the back of my legs. And I remember Sue Hitzman grabbing the ends of her roller and pulling it up really high into the gluteal fold. Just make sure that your butt stays down. You can let go of that roller. My heels are going to stay on the floor. And in class today, I had you do one leg at a time just to start. So I'm going to let the right heel stay on the floor and the leg kind of drops open to the right. I'm going to drag the leg open. My toes are going to turn in towards the midline. I'm going to drag the leg closed. And I'm thinking about the way this inner thigh is pressing in, the back of my thigh is pressing into the roller and twisting. It's kind of nice to do one leg at a time if you're dealing with some hip issues and you can really kind of understand the mobility issue of your hips. So I remember one time I had hurt my left hip and it was nice to just do my left one all by itself so I could really pay attention to that range of motion. Okay, so we do about 3 or 4 passes here and then we do the same thing over on the left side, dropping the leg open, dragging that heel on the floor and then pulling it back in. And you want to feel the back of your thigh getting twisted against your roller. And one of the reasons why we have this nice texture is so that the texture of the roller can really manipulate the tissue. Again, this is a compression technique, but we're being methodical about how we're moving against the roller. The back of your thigh has very fibrous connective tissue, very similar to the plantar fascia. It's kind of tough. So I'm gonna just let my legs just settle here for a moment, and I'm gonna move the roller halfway down to my middle of my hamstring. And let's try it with both legs together. So the legs will drop open and you'll drag, turn your toes in and pull the legs together. Sometimes I can feel if I have tension on the outer leg, that IT band, when I do this particular technique, I can actually get in there and manipulate that tissue a little bit. And so about 3 or 4 passes, and then come on back into center. Just take a little breath, and then we'll move it one more time, and we'll go a little bit lower. So just make sure you're not in the knee space. And this is a good reminder to say to you, never put the roller in the spaces of the body, or only on the masses of the body. So from here again, I'm going to open and close. Toes drop out wide as you open, toes come in together as you close. About 3 or 4 of those. And then in class today, we went ahead and we did the calf. So I asked you to just take your right foot onto the roller and just push the roller down to your calves. And you kind of start at the biggest, beefiest part of the calf. It makes me laugh because I got stuck in a really beautiful pair of boots at Nordstrom one time with my big calves. Anyway, so I'm at the biggest, beefiest part of my calf. And I'm going to take my right leg and cross it over my left. If you don't like the way that feels, just keep both legs on the roller. It's totally up to you. But I kind of like having a little extra weight on that calf. I'm going to keep my calf muscle against the roller as I bend my left knee and straighten. Sue Hitzman would ask that you keep your ankle nice and relaxed here so that you're allowing the roller to manipulate the tissue that's quite deep inside the calf. But if you flex your foot, it feels very different. You're really just on the surface layer of connective tissue right underneath the skin, it feels like. You can also move the roller any way you like. So if I take my foot and I move it, I can bring the roller a little bit lower towards my ankle. And I remember Sue Hitzman saying that if you had a lot of tension on the lower portion of the calf, you could potentially have a hip issue. And if you felt like the calf was tender more towards the knee, then you could have a knee issue. So just something to think about. So I'm just moving around a little bit. I kind of found a little spot kind of here low. I love the calf muscle. It's like a pump, and it stores energy. And as you walk, you want to make sure that the calf can contract and expand as you move. It's going to propel you forward. And if the calf gets tight and sticky, then walking becomes more labored. It's more of an effort. I'm letting the calf muscle just rest on the roller. And we did 2 shear techniques today. You can allow the legs to drift right and left. I can hear Sue Hitzman saying it makes your feet look like little windshield wipers. And you can also hold the weight of the legs still and circle an ankle, and that joint will move the connective tissue. It's called an indirect shear. And you'll just hang out here and you'll wait for a moment. And then you'll go ahead and do the same thing on the other side. So you could start by getting that roller on that big beefy part of the calf. Keep the calf in contact with the roller. This one has a little bit of a learning curve. I've noticed that a lot of students don't necessarily get this on the first day. It's kind of a weird thing to do. We're not used to moving like this. So just take your time and feel your way through it. So I feel like I've got like a little knot right about there. So I'm just kind of manipulating. I'm manipulating the tissue. There's dryness here. The nerve endings are sending little messages of discomfort to my brain. You have 6 times as many nerve endings inside your connective tissue than you do anywhere else in your body. So it's really the way the body communicates. And I'm just going to hold that still. And I'm going to let my legs drift right and left. So I'm coming cross friction, coming across the tissue. And then I'll just settle that leg again onto the roller, and I'll rotate my ankle. And people will say, oh, can I go both directions? Sure, you can do whatever you want. And then I'm just going to hang out here and wait for a moment. All right, so I'm going to come back up. And we have a couple of different ways to rinse. In class, sometimes I find it easier because sometimes we're pressed for time. So I'm just going to show you a couple of ways to do that. So you can just take your hands at the back of your leg and just use your hands to send some fresh fluid from the hip down the leg. As I mentioned in class today, the fluid inside the connective tissue system acts like little rivers. And so this is the particular current for the back line of tissue. And then you come up the inner thigh. And you can come up and you can come down. So you can use your hands up and then down the inner thigh. And you could do it at the same time if you wanted to. So go down the back line, sorry, and up the inner thigh. Down the back and up the inner thigh. I hope I said that right before. That is the back line of tissue that goes all the way from position number 5 on your foot all the way up to your head. Okay, so let's go ahead and use the roller too. And this is, it feels awesome, but for some people it's hard to get into the position, and the roller just is weird for them. It's like I have a hard time using a curling iron and looking in the mirror, so it kind of reminds me of that. Okay, so what I'm going to have you do, if you want to try it, is another type of rinse for the inner thigh and the back of the thigh. My knees are bent, my roller is off to the right side, and I'm going to take my calf low towards my ankle against the roller, and I'm going to orient my knees to the left. So everything is left, and I'm going to come up the inside of my calf. I'm going to turn my toes to the ceiling, and I'm going to bend my knee. So I'm going to let my knees drift to the left, extend my leg, turn my toes to the ceiling, and bend my knee. This is called a short pass, and you'll see why in a second. So there's another way to do it where you can slide. It's kind of hard to do it on a yoga mat because it's sticky. And then you can bring it back. And this gives you a longer pass. So I hope you're seeing that, just a little bit more complicated to get the rinse done. If you don't have good extension in your wrist, if you have a hard time supporting your body weight in your hands, it can be kind of hard for people to do this one. Okay, so I'm going to do the upper part of my leg, pull this down. So I'm going to do the same thing. I'm just above my knee, and I'm going to let my knees come over to the left, and you do a short pass. So you're not going to go very far. Or you can do a longer pass by sliding your butt against the floor. My knees are oriented to the left, but when I come down the back line, my toes are going to point up towards the ceiling. See if I can move myself here so you can see that a little bit better. Can you see how the leg changes its position? So there's the toes towards the left, toes to the ceiling, toes to the left, toes to the ceiling. And I'm supporting my weight in my hands. So again, for some people, that's just really kind of hard. So don't feel like you have to torture yourself. You can always just use your hands to get that fluid to start to move. As a matter of fact, I mentioned in class that when you sit for a long period of time, you should actually do that. When you get up off the chair, go ahead and just use your hands and just manipulate the fluid, because sitting is basically a compression technique. So let's do it on the left leg. Knees are pointing over to the right. I'm on the inside of my calf, and I'm going to lengthen the leg, turn my toes to the ceiling, and pull it back. Toes turning over to the right, lengthen the leg, toes point to the ceiling, pull it back. Short pass because my butt is staying in one place. Again, kind of a hard position for some people to get into. Even just this short pass can be hard. The other way to do it is to slide your butt with the roller, or just pick your hips right up off the floor. It's like a little swing. Not always easy for people. So you just pick what works for you. And then I'll just move it up to my inner thigh. Okay, cool. Okay, So that is that. And the back of the thigh can get very dehydrated. And for those of us that do have hamstring cramps during class, it could be one of the reasons why. Just the hamstrings are just really dry. Okay, let's go ahead and have you do a final assessment. Oh, it's so pretty out tonight. Okay, so from here, we want to think about putting ourselves in this rest assess position, just noticing the masses and spaces of the body. Ideally, the shoulder blades feel wider, flatter, heavier on the floor, and for me, they totally do. And it's kind of weird because we didn't really do that much for the shoulder blades, but any tension that I was holding in my body has been released. I take a finger, poke it into my belly button. Ideally, the bottom of the rib cage has some weight on it. You know, sometimes when you do the inner thigh and you're up in that sternal position, some people do kind of put a little hyperextension in through the spine. So it's not unusual if you're not feeling like you've got weight here. So we can take you into that little shell stretch or child's pose up on the roller here in just a second. And then ideally I'm on my butt cheeks, which I feel like I am. And then from here, the back of the thighs, it just feels very weighted for me. I have more touch of the back of the thighs on the floor. And then you could do the autopilot assessment, thinking about the leg length, the weight difference that I may have, and I actually feel nice and even. Okay, so it's not unusual, again, for some students to feel like they're hyperextended through the spinal column after we've done inner thigh because they're hyperextending when they're in that sternal position. So we could do just a quickie and send that roller underneath your legs, engage your core, pick your hips up and grab your roller. Just bring that right underneath the back of your pelvis. And then just take your knees into your chest. And it just gives you some flexion. You can feel like you're getting some length through that low back curve. It's such a nice position. I love doing this. People usually get pretty excited about it. The shoulders are nice and wide and relaxed. Your face is relaxed. And it often doesn't take long, just enough to change the shape of that tissue. And that's really what this is all about. We don't want to deform the cells of your body by holding your body in an less than ideal alignment. You don't want to damage your cells. You want to load the cells so that they stay as neutral as they can. And I've read that you can look at people that have had respiratory issues and heart attacks, and you can actually see that the alignment of the body is partly to blame. When people are holding a lot of flexion in the spinal column, they can create a lot of respiratory issues for themselves. So I've just come off the roller and it even feels better. Like I just feel like I have more weight in through my rib cage. It feels great. Okay, so the last thing that we're gonna do is we're gonna do one more balance assessment. So go ahead and grab your roller, come on up to standing. And let's take the roller off to the left side. Your feet are hip distance apart. The tops of the toes are nice and even. And I'm going to take my right foot off the floor. I'm going to exhale to engage my core as I lift that foot up. I'm going to close my eyes. And I'm going to bring it back down. Good. So I felt a little tippy at first, which was kind of interesting. And I could make a case that my nervous system is just kind of getting reacquainted with this particular alignment and trying to figure out how to keep me nice and balanced and stable. You know, everything is kind of changing when you do the melt method. Your joint location changes, the spine changes, the lungs change. And so everything has to adapt. So I'm going to move the roller over to my right side and I'm going to settle onto my right foot. I'm thinking about my neutral alignment of my foot. I'm going to let my heel come up over here on the left. I'm going to exhale nice and strong. Make sure I feel that nice neutral through my low back curve. My shoulders are right over my hips. And then close your eyes and see how that feels. And then come on back to standing. So how was that? Class number 2. So I hope that that was a good one for you. Let me know if you have any questions, concerns, complaints, criticisms, whatever happens. I'd love to know about it. Please feel free to schedule another little session with me. I like to talk to you. It helps me figure out what we need to work on, what I need to tell you. I hope that you've enjoyed class. It's really, really nice to see you all. So lots of love to you, and I'll see you next time.